They search the defendant's car. It's actually the defendant's mother's car, but it's the one he drove. It's a white Geo Prism. They search it that week. One of the items they find in the car was, in the defendant's car, was an envelope addressed to Kimberly Parrish. And inside the envelope was a letter to Kimberly Parrish and a purported check from the United States Treasury for $14,000. I don't know even that this check is really a legitimate check, to be honest with you, Your Honor. I don't think it is. But it was Kimberly Parrish's check in the defendant's car when they searched it that week. And there's no reason for him to have that. They took a canine, a cadaver dog. And I've worked with dogs before, and I can tell you they're incredible, the things they can find and do. And what this canine expert, Jeff Jordan, was telling me about his canine trooper is amazing. But he took his canine trooper, trained solely to find out if there's ever been any human decomposition in an area. And Trooper, the canine that we hit on both the front seat of that white Prism, the defendant's car, and the back seat. And he had to redo it again just to make sure, even though he said, you never have to do that. And the dog did it again. He hit on that back seat as a human being. He said there's no doubt in his mind a dead human body had been in that back seat of that car. And again, it would have been really interesting to hear his testimony because it's pretty incredible. He says those dogs have such an incredible sense of smell that 3 years later, if you still have the car, unless they've detailed the car thoroughly, that dog will hit on that same area. That's how incredible their sense of smell is. So there was no doubt in his mind that not necessarily Kim Parrish's, but a dead body had been in that back seat of that car. On March 16th, 2013, one of the defendant's relatives came forward because they saw one of their dogs on the piece of property where the defendant lived, chewing on a piece of bone. That bone was turned over to the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office, and it has been identified as a piece of human skull. There's no DNA out of that, but it has been identified as a piece of human skull found near where the defendant lived, actually on his property. Your Honor, a number of not only family members, like that family member that found the skull, but a number of witnesses have come forward against the defendant to testify against him as well. One of which is the defendant's cousin, his first cousin. He knew the defendant very, very well. He actually was in jail with the defendant for like 1 day. He said that the defendant came to him and started bragging about and joking how he had buried Kim Parrish's body on the premises, and law enforcement had just walked right over the body as the dogs. But what really struck the cousin and upset him, and the reason he came forward and was willing to testify against the defendant, wasn't just the story about burying the body, but it was how he said he told it, that he was cold and thought it was funny and laughed and bragged about it. We had 2 more people in prison that were serving hard time, one of which, I'll tell you, went to CCI at the age of 17 for very, very, very serious crimes in 1981 out of Lexington County. That's a rape and house break. And he's been in and out of prison ever since. He said he learned how to shave in prison. I asked him, he sat in my downstairs. He now has no charges on him. I have nothing to hold over his head. And I asked him, I said, you're obviously not a friend of mine. He said, nope. I said, do you like law enforcement? He said, nope. I said, have you ever testified against somebody? How many confessions have you heard in prison before? He said, hundreds. I said, you ever testified against anybody? He said, no, hell no. We got a code. We would do that. And I asked him, well, why would you testify against him? Kenneth Cutter. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what he said, but he didn't have a very high opinion of Mr. Cutter. It just tells you how cold and malicious he was. But even this person who's been in prison for serious crimes had a problem with him bragging about getting rid of the body of a mother of 2 children. So he was going to testify, as well as another person who's doing time right now for voluntary manslaughter was going to testify. That person was actually going to testify that the defendant confessed to him to killing Kimberly Parrish. So, finally, the last thing I want to mention about with regards to what we had on October the 19th of this year, the defendant did give a statement to investigator Craig Davis. He, during that statement, would not admit to killing Kimberly Parrish. but he did admit to finding her body on that Friday night, December the 21st, and he even admits that he took the body, put it in a burn barrel, and burned it for 10 to 12 hours that Friday night into Saturday morning, that he cooled the body off with a water hose, cooled it down, put Kimberly's body in a trash bag, and dumped it at the dump on Saturday the 21st. We have a multitude of witnesses who are going to come in and actually contradict some of the things that the defendant said with regards to that statement, to prove not just about how he really disposed of it. Could have been similar to that, I don't know, but more importantly, to prove that he murdered Kimberly Parrish, that he did more than just get rid of her body. Not to mention the fact that, Your Honor, it makes absolutely no sense to get rid of another person's human body, much less the mother of 2 children, unless you did commit the murder. One last point, in fact, I'll make about that. The one thing the defendant always, what he tried to do when he first gave his statements to investigators Holden and Robinson, is, hey, by the way, yeah, I saw her at 12, 1 o'clock that afternoon. At 3 o'clock, I tried calling her, and the phone went straight to voicemail. And that's true. I looked at the phone records. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, he tried calling the victim, Kimberly Parrish. And my argument, of course, all along was going to be, well, the reason we knew then that Kimberly Parrish was murdered, because he was just calling her to lay out a defense. What proves what I was going to argue, Your Honor, was that he's now admitted to burning Kimberly Parrish's body from 10 o'clock at night on to the next morning. Well, at midnight on December the 22nd, when he knows she's dead, when he's standing next to her body, burning it in a burn barrel, he's calling her cell phone then. What proves that the defendant was just trying to set up a defense was later that night, after the sheriff's office has come to talk to him. When he knows and has already admitted that Kimberly Parrish is dead, he's calling her cell phone then too. So that's probably half of what we were going to present in this case. And I think Your Honor gets a good idea that the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. There's no doubt that Kenneth Cutter was going to be found guilty and held responsible for the murder of Kimberly